If anyone can actually hear me. I'm just going to turn on the camera. Okay. Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. Sorry about that. I just had issues with connecting to Google. It always happens, honestly, but I think now we should be good. So I'm just going to start the recording. Just making sure that it is recording. Let's see, stop, record. Okay, I think the session has started. Okay, so I'm just going to keep the chat just next to me, but I will be starting with the session, right? So welcome to the day one of the Azure Fundamentals sort of exam preparation session. You guys can use the chat just to let me know if you are able to hear me or if you're not able to hear me. But yeah, sorry guys, we are I think about 37 minutes late, but we'll get started I think now, right? Cool. So this is going to be an AZ-900 exam prep session. So the first session is going to be today, and then the second one is going to be tomorrow. As I said, we are a bit late, so we're supposed to start at 5, but I think tomorrow I'll just ensure that we start on time. So just in terms of the exam itself, I think this is a really good exam especially for people that would like to get some sort of experience in the cloud computing space. It's really a good exam or certification for that. So I think before we sort of get into the detail, right, maybe just an introduction to myself. So my name is Clarence Vusimandia. So I'm also the founder of Whittle Academy. So some of you might be students of Whittle Academy. Some of you might be familiar with Whittle Academy from watching some of the TikTok and YouTube videos that we basically have, right? In terms of my experience, I've worked at some of the big fours, I think for like 3 years, and I think I've since then left to fully focus on Whittle Academy, as I'm really passionate about upskilling people in data, in AI, and all of that, right? From a university level, I went to this university where I actually studied information systems. So that's basically my sort of academic experience. And I've done a couple of certifications, the Azure Fundamentals being one of them. So I've done the Azure Data Scientist, Azure Power BI, AI Engineer. I think this one is already retired. There's basically a new certification, the Cloud Practitioner, and also the Azure Fundamentals, the one that we're basically going to be learning about today. So I do have some of the certifications just to give you guys some comfort, and hopefully we can break down the concepts and make it easy. And I can see that there's not a lot of people in attendance, but hopefully we can get more engagement in terms of understanding the context. And you guys are also free to ask me questions wherever actually needed, right? Cool. Now, I think I'll just jump onto the exam overview, right? So this is a really cool exam to actually write or do, right? But if I can just go through it. So overview of the exam, it's called the Azure 900 exam. So that's what the exam is actually called. So it's called the Azure 900 exam. It is about, I would say 40 to 60 questions. It really depends on some of the days or the level of difficulty that they would have actually added. In terms of the duration, this is normally around 45 minutes, right? So it's normally around 45 minutes. It's not really a long exam, right? So in terms of how do you actually, in terms of the passing score, so you actually need to score about 700 points out of 1,000. That's sort of like the requirement for you to sort of actually pass the exam. So that's what they need. The format, it's a multiple choice type of question, so it's not too crazy. And there's a costing obviously attached to it. But I feel like these days there's a lot of material. Microsoft is actually issuing out a lot of certification vouchers. I think that should make it much more cheaper, or even discounts, they do offer that, right? So now, who should actually write this exam, right? Like I said, if you are someone who would like to get some sort of like foundational level understanding of the Azure Fundamentals, I think, or cloud computing in general, I think it's a really great certification for anyone who just wants to understand what is cloud computing, or if you're going to be working with any of the Azure sort of like certifications, I'd say it's a really cool certification to go through. For me, it really helped me with understanding what cloud computing is. And if you want to go further and focus on let's say the Microsoft environment and all of that, it's a really good certification, right? And it covers quite a lot, which is what we're going to go into much more detail. Cool. So I think before we get to the questions and all of that, I think it's really important that we cover sort of like the skills that are measured within the certification, right? So there's a couple of skills that the certification actually measures, right? So you get 25% up until 30% on the cloud concepts. So they start by testing you like the fundamental cloud computing concepts that you basically need to understand. So then you look at defining what is cloud computing. Very basic. You need to have a basic understanding of what cloud computing is. You need to understand the shared responsibility model. It's another very important concept for you to sort of get an understanding of, like who's responsible for what, depending on the cloud service type that you're actually using. And then the cloud models are using a public, hybrid, and all of that. You need to be able to distinguish between all of those different areas or domains, right? It's very important. And consumption-based, so it is actually a consumption-based model, so meaning that you pay as you use. Understanding the benefits of cloud computing, very important, right? Because they will test you on the sort of benefits of cloud computing, like high availability, scalability, reliability of cloud computing. You know, those are some of the things that are really, really important. And understanding the different service types, like as I mentioned, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, all of those things are really, really important to sort of understand. And I think the other section that is really important, and I think this is the biggest part of the exam, honestly. So this is the Azure architecture and services. So this is where you start to learn about the architecture behind making cloud computing actually work, especially from an Azure perspective, right? And you also need to understand the different services. So you look at regions, availability zones, data centers, resources, subscriptions, management groups, and all of that. So those are some of the things that you basically sort of need to have an understanding of, as it's really important to sort of get that. Please, guys, use the chat. I think there's about 6 people currently watching. Please just use the chat to just indicate, because I'm not sure if anyone can actually hear me. So if you can hear me, please just send a note on the chat so that I can actually see that someone is actually hearing me. So, and the other thing you need to understand is the compute, right? When it comes to compute, this is where you need to understand what is a virtual machine, what are containers, what are functions. Then the networking side of it, which I feel like is a bit tricky, especially I'm not from a let's say security side of things. So I think that's one of the areas that I genuinely found very challenging during the exam, right? Because you have to understand virtual networks, virtual private networks. Okay, cool. Someone says they can hear me. VPN, express routes, and all of that. And even storage, right? Storage is really important, like storage services, redundancy. And then the other part which is important here is identity security, zero trust, and all of that. You need to understand all of those different concepts, right? So I feel like this is really, if I would say, the most difficult part of the exam. I think, honestly, from my perspective, it's really quite challenging, and the questions that they do ask can quite be misleading sometimes, right? So that's one thing about this section. Then the last one, I find this one sort of, one of the easier ones where you can actually grab your points and stuff like that. So the management and governance, this one focuses on how do you sort of like manage and govern the cloud, right? So it looks at things like your cost management, pricing, your Azure policies, resource locking and stuff like that. Microsoft Purview, which is a really good compliance tool. A lot of companies actually use it. So knowing Microsoft Purview is a very important aspect. And you've got the Azure portal. This is when you start to do infrastructure as a code, right? So instead of you sort of like using an interface to configure the infrastructure of the cloud, you can actually write code to build the infrastructure. So the whole thing is called infrastructure as a code. And monitoring, this is where you look at the health of the cloud environment and stuff like that. I would say it's one of the easier ones to actually do, especially when you compare it with the other sections, honestly. The one in the middle, I feel like that one is really, really hectic, honestly. So that's the one you want to find yourself spending much more time on. Right, let's see. Hopefully I'm still connected. Cool. I'm just going to go to the next one. Cool. So I think there's a couple of domains, right? I think this is sort of trying to get into the detail of the different domains. I think we sort of went into this quite a little bit, right? So domain number one is cloud concepts. So if you can see, there's cloud concepts, Azure architecture, and then management. So those are the three sections that you need to understand before you write the exam. And I've just put a summary of the things that you need to remember. So be able to define what is cloud computing, understand what the shared model or responsibility is, know the difference between public, private, and the hybrid model, understand the use cases for cloud computing, what do we use cloud computing for, understand the consumption-based model, the pricing model, very important for you to understand the different pricing models that they actually offer. Serverless computing, very important to understand. And also the benefits, that you need to have the benefits of cloud computing at the back of your head, like high availability, scalability, reliability, and all of that. And also cloud computing service type, like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and also the use cases for all of those different sort of cloud computing resources, right? So those are some of the things that are really important for you to understand. And domain number two, which is the one I indicated that is really difficult, these are the core things that you need to remember or sort of like be able to understand. So I think that's, you could even take a screenshot of this one. It's very important. So if you see anything from this presentation that maybe you have not seen before, I think it would be important for you to maybe have a look at it and all of that. But before I finish, can you guys, is there someone who's attending or who's learning the Azure Fundamentals for the first time? If there is someone, please add a comment. I just want to check, because I could start from the very fundamental if there is someone who needs the basic understanding of cloud computing at a very basic level. So domain number four, as I've indicated, there is three areas: cost management. How do you manage the costing within a cloud environment? And then you've got governance and compliance. So that one predominantly focuses on the Microsoft Purview and Azure policies. And then you've got Azure policy and then resource logs and all of that. So that one would focus on that area. And then you've got the management and deployment. So this is where you look at infrastructure as a code and stuff like that. Then the last one is the monitoring and all of that. Right, cool. Okay, I see there is someone who's attending this for the first time. Okay, cool. Great. So maybe before I get into the concepts of the exams and whatever, I want to give you guys a high level overview of like, where does this whole idea of cloud computing actually come from? And just to paint a bigger picture for anyone who maybe you're not doing IT and you just want to understand what this technology is all about. So I'm just going to quickly move around my screens. I want to bring over my drawing board just a bit. Let's see if I can get it running. In the meantime, are there any questions? Okay, I'm just going to get my drawing board ready. Okay, cool. Just going to bring Miro over here. Okay, I'm going to escape this. Please let me know when you can see my board. Okay. Okay, I think my screen should be up now. Okay, I won't be able to see the chat for some time because I'm just going to present from the screen here. Because it doesn't seem to want to move around. Okay, presentation. Right. Okay, can anyone confirm if they can see my screen? Okay, so I'm just going to get started. You guys will let me know if you can see it, but I won't be able to see the chat for some time. But I'll just get started in terms of what exactly is cloud computing for those that are really getting started, because I think that's a very important aspect that's going to be useful as you actually prepare for the exam. Okay, cool. I'll just use my phone to see the comments because my other screen is not showing up. Okay, cool. So what is this idea of cloud computing, right? So maybe let's think about it, right? Why do companies even want to have cloud computing as a thing? Now, I think the first starting point, let's create a hypothetical company, right? I'm just going to call this company. Let me see. I'm just going to put the text over here. Just extend it, right? Let's call it ABC Tech, right? Cool. So we've got ABC Tech over here, and this company basically has an office, right? Let's say this could be their office. It could be mid-range or anywhere in the wherever they are. And this company, let's say they are in Santon, right? This company is in Santon, and they basically have something that they call a data center, right? They've got a data center, and this data center is actually found just within the premises, right? So this is basically their premises. This would be the gates and whatever. And then within this building, you've got a data center, right? So I'm just gonna call this DC. So just to explain it for those that might not know, a data center is basically, how can I put it? It's basically a place where all of your IT infrastructure would basically be found. So all your databases, all your servers and stuff like that. So your storage facility, all the information that you're using, transactions and all of that for your company would be stored over here, right? So this company, ABC Tech, provides services to companies. So let's say they provide services in relation to consulting services, right? Let's say they do IT consulting services. Don't mind my handwriting. Consulting services, right? So they provide consulting services, and they need to store their customer details, and they also need to store whatever information that relates to their customer. And all of that information is found within their data center, right? It's located in-house, right? That's how the whole thing is actually found. So this is what they call on-premises, right? Because it's actually located within the place that the company is actually found. Cool. So now, on a certain event, there was an earthquake, right? We know that earthquakes don't happen in South Africa, but hypothetically, there was an earthquake that actually happened. So as a result of an earthquake, what happened is that the data center was destroyed, and all of their systems actually went offline, right? So all of their systems are now offline because there was an earthquake and all of that. And as a result, they have lost all the customer details and all of that. Now, imagine this company is providing services for you, and they lose all of that information. They lose records of all the presentations they had and everything. Everything is literally gone. Even the employee details and stuff like that, everything is literally gone, right? Now, because of this company learned a lesson, and they were like, okay, let's not just have one data center. Let's have one on premises, and let's have another in a different location, right? So now they have this other data center where they store the information. So what they do, the information they keep over here, they also store the same information over here. So if we've got, let's say, 10 terabytes over here, you'll also have 10 terabytes over here, right? Let's just assume that it's 10 terabytes worth of data that is stored. Now, this company has decided to store this information in another place, right? That's basically what they've decided to do. Now, because this is sort of not located within the same place, somehow they need to be connected to this via the internet, right? That's the whole idea now. So they need to still connect to this. So if something happens to this data center, they can still recover their information on this other data center, right? Cool. That's the model that they decided to go with. But now what happened is that they started to see it's not possible for them to be able to maintain this business model because it can be sort of like very expensive, right? So what happened, because this model is very expensive, because now imagine if, let's say this is located in Sandton, right? Let's say this is in Sandton, and let's say this is in Midrand, right? What if something happens to the entire province in Gauteng, right? Let's say hypothetically something happens to the entire province, right? So now this also means that the only way they can be safe is maybe let's have another data center in Cape Town, right? Let's have another data center in Cape Town. So they build another data center in Cape Town. Now, this is all great in an idea, right? But where do we get the money and the funding to actually do something like this, right? So a lot of companies actually realize that, you know, to still recover your data or to keep your data safe, it's really expensive, right? And that's when companies like AWS, right? So you've got your AWS, Amazon Web Services, then you've got your Azure, which is basically a Microsoft company, right, that focuses on cloud computing. Then you've got GCP, which is Google Cloud. So what this company said, instead of you building data centers all over the world, we can actually build the data centers for you, and you can just store the information that you need. You don't have to maintain, because just to manage all of these different data centers over here, you need to pay for the security. You need to ensure that the network is available and all of that. So that being done by one company is really difficult to actually do. And most companies don't have funding, and most companies don't even have the money to be able to do such an initiative, right? So I think from seeing all of this company decided, okay, cool. Instead of you building all of this, let's rather do it this way, right? I'm just going to try to move my screen, right? So what happened is that I'm going to use, let's say, Azure as an example. So Azure, which is Microsoft, right? So what Azure decided to do, they were like, okay, cool, let's do this. Let's go, assuming that this is the world map, right? I know this handwriting is really bad. Assuming that this is the world map, so what we are going to do is we are going to build a data center in America. We're going to build a data center, let's say, in Brazil. We're going to build a data center in South Africa. We're going to build a data center maybe in China. I'm not sure if they even allow them to build a data center in China. In South Africa, and let's say Botswana. You know, there's so many different countries. So these guys decided to build all of these data centers all over the world, right? So you've got all these different data centers all over the world. Now, if you start your own company now, let's say I've started my own company, right? Let's call it Clearances Company, right? So I start my own company. What happens is that now I do not have to build my own data center just like the IT company here actually did, because they decided to build a data center. But now, in order for them to protect their information and their data, they had to do so many things just to ensure that nothing actually happens, right? And this model is very expensive. So what about me, who just started a small company and I cannot afford to build the infrastructure? All I need to do, what Azure does, they will give you a website. So you go to the Azure website over here, right? And then you will go tell them, guys, I'm starting this company. This is the information that I'm storing. Can I please get a database? Can I please get a server to do this particular thing? Whatever that I request, and I can tell them on which country do I want to have this, and do I want to have copies of my data, so that if something actually happens, I can still recover and I can still basically come back and say, okay, cool, my information is actually safe, right? So I could say, okay, Microsoft, please store one of my information in, let's say in China, in Brazil, in America, or something like that. If something happens to the data that I've stored in South Africa, I know that it can actually be recovered in other countries, right? So what they did, they took away the responsibility of you building your own data centers and having your own local data centers to countries, to you actually renting out. So if you think about it, it's actually you renting out a data center for whatever service that you need, and you don't have to take every single service because you only, if you need a storage, you're only going to get yourself storage and all of that, right? So they basically made this whole thing much more easier because I don't have to build my own data center, right? The one thing to understand, normally people say it's in the cloud and whatever, but what cloud computing is really all about is that you do not own your own data center, you basically rent it from someone else. That is the whole idea of cloud computing. We still have physical data centers, it's just that you do not have the data center, you basically rent out whatever information that you basically want to have, right? I'm not sure if that at a very basic level, if it makes sense to those that are just starting out, right? It's not to say data centers are no longer existing. They are there, but you are basically renting out data centers from these companies like Microsoft, and because they have the capital and the money to actually build this infrastructure all over the world, and because they can do that, you can decide where you want to store your data, and if something happens, you know that you actually are protecting your information elsewhere. Cool. I'm just checking if there's any questions on the chat. I'm just going to switch over to the presentation. Okay, hopefully everyone was able to hear me, so I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, cool. So now I will switch over to the presentation again. Okay, the technology is betraying me. Can everyone hear me? Can anyone hear me? Okay, I think I should be back. Hopefully everyone can now hear me. Okay, cool. So I think hopefully that gives those that are just getting started some sort of understanding of what cloud computing is all about. So I think now we are going to get started with the first chapter, right, of defining, so the first domain and also the questions that we have for the domain, right? So I think for this domain, what's going to be important to understand is what exactly is cloud computing. So defining cloud computing, as I've already explained, it's basically the on-demand delivery of computing service over the internet. So you just go to a company's website and you access all of those cloud computing resources, right? And in terms of the other thing that you need to understand is the benefit, high availability, scalability, and all of that. So with that understanding, let's go into the questions and see what's actually coming within the exam, right? So I think starting with the first question, and I think what the structure that we're going to follow is that for each question, we'll break it down just to get an understanding of why a certain answer is correct. So I'm just going to use my phone to check the chat because I think my screen is not moving properly. So first thing, what exactly is cloud? So the first question says, which cloud computing model allows organizations to share resources with other organizations? So you guys can actually use the chat. If you think the answer is A, you can say A and we can sort of break down the answer. So I am monitoring the chat. So first thing we need to understand, so they're asking us which cloud computing model allows organizations to be able to share resources with other organizations while maintaining the same dedicated resources. I'm just checking if there's anyone who wants to give this one a try. Do you guys think it's A? Is it B? Is it C? Okay, while I wait for the answers. Okay, now let's think about it, right? So these are basically the different ways that you can consume the cloud. So the first one is called a public cloud, right? Okay, I see there's an answer. Okay, someone says C. Okay, that's good to see. Okay. Okay, cool. I think a lot of people are saying hybrid, right, which is good, right? So now looking at this answer, I think the first thing we need to ask ourselves, what is a public cloud, right? A public cloud basically means that there is not dedicated infrastructure to a particular company, right? So we all could be using the same infrastructure, but not to say that they don't sort of separate that information for different individuals. But a lot of companies might stay away from this one because due to regulation and compliance, you don't want to share resources with the general public. You want to have your own dedicated infrastructure. Then the private cloud, I think the nice thing about this one is that you actually, I've seen someone say, is the live paused or I think it's not paused. We are actually in the live. Okay, I think maybe it could be on your side. So the private cloud, this one means that you go to this cloud provider and say you want to have your own dedicated infrastructure because due to regulation and all of that, but it could be quite expensive sometimes. So some companies would rather go for the hybrid model. Now the hybrid basically means that you want to use both public and the private cloud. It's the best of both worlds, as people might actually call it. The last one, which is called community, the one that is called community, one thing about it, it's basically a cloud service model where, how can I put it? So think about this. Let's say different companies decide to partner up and they say that we want to use the same, we want maybe a private cloud, but we want to share it with different entities or different organizations, right? It could be maybe, let's say, the government entities that want to share certain, let's say, Azure resources and stuff like that. That's sort of the community one. So it's basically multiple different companies actually sharing cloud resources, right? So that's sort of the difference. But I do have a breakdown, and I've seen some of you have said hybrid, which is correct, right? So firstly, the reason why the hybrid model is correct, it's because a hybrid cloud model basically is a combination of public and private clouds, allowing organizations to share some resources publicly while keeping sensitive data dedicated resources in the private environment, right? That's the important thing. The reason why public cloud does not work is because public shares all of the resources, right? In this scenario, they basically want sort of like some sort of mix between the two. Private, it's great, but that doesn't give us a mix. Community is not also recognized when it comes to the Microsoft side of things. Very important to note. I think some platforms do speak about community, but from a Microsoft perspective, it's not normally recognized, right? I see there's a question saying, how is community different from hybrid, right? Let me, hopefully my screen doesn't betray me again. I'm just going to quickly demonstrate that. Right, cool. Maybe rather than, let me see if I can extend it from here. And I'm just going to click this, and I'll create a new blank slide. And I'm going to use draw. I think it's better that I draw here because on the other side it's not working. Cool. I'm just going to explain, right, the difference between. So now let's do this, right? I know my drawing is bad, right? So hybrid basically says you've got public and you've got private. Right. So this is the cloud environment, right? And then you've decided to split this into public and you've got the private. So this becomes a hybrid cloud model, right? Cool. Now, with the community one, it's actually different, right? The community one is not based on whether it's a public or private. It's based on a different sort of concept. Let's see if I can find the eraser. So I'm going to erase this information. A community type would be something like this. So if I split it here, let's say this is company A, this is another company, this is another company, and this is another company. So this becomes a community type of cloud model because you've decided to you bought this infrastructure, but you are now sharing it with multiple companies. So it's different companies basically sharing sort of like the infrastructure. It could be, let's say, a private cloud, it could be a public cloud or stuff like that. But it's basically multiple companies coming together to share sort of like a cloud resource. But it's not to say it's companies that do not know each other. Like it's companies that actually know each other and they buy the infrastructure, they decide to actually share it within themselves, right? It's very different from the public cloud because the public cloud, you cannot control who actually uses it, but with the community one, you can actually control who is part of that community or who actually forms part of that whole infrastructure. So I'd say that is the difference between a community and the hybrid. Hopefully that clarifies it. So it's a very important question to understand because someone might think that community is the same as hybrid, which is why it was explicitly disqualified because of that. I think it's just going to be better for me to just draw on the slides because I think switching screens actually does create some sort of problem, right? Cool. So hopefully that creates an understanding what that is. Now, cool. So just to recap the questions, the reason why all of that is wrong, we can already see the answers, right? Cool. So now let's go to question number 2. If you guys already know the answer, I think you can just share the answer with me so that I can know what you guys are actually thinking. So with the first one, question number 2 now says, in the shared responsibility model, which responsibility always remains with the cloud provider? Very important. Now, you see now here they are testing your understanding of the shared responsibility model, right? So if you have an understanding of the shared responsibility model, it will be easy for you to answer this question. So lucky for us, I actually I've got the shared responsibility model over here, right? So this is what the shared responsibility model actually looks like. Hopefully everyone can actually see it. Okay, I already see people are saying C. Okay, that's great. Okay, I see someone is saying C. But let's speak about this shared responsibility model, right? So going to the shared responsibility model, so you can see that you've got multiple service types. You've got the software as a service, and you've got the platform as a service and all of that. So the shared responsibility model basically speaks about okay, I've just zoomed in. So it speaks about who is responsible for what, right? So if you have a look at there, you've got Microsoft, you've got the customer, and you've got shared, right? So wherever you've got this shading, you know that Microsoft is responsible, and then you've got the customer, right? So you can see that the customer on premises is normally responsible for quite a lot of activities. I love that, like physical data centers and all of that, right? So this actually shows you what you're responsible for. If you're using platform as a service, you are responsible for the accounts, identities, mobile devices, and all of that. If it's software as a service, you're responsible for the information, the devices, and all of that. So the limit for the responsibility would normally end at that point, right? So if you look at here, on premises is basically the traditional model. If you guys remember the first example that we actually did, on premises would be a company deciding to own their own data center. Because you own your own data center, you basically need to manage everything, including the physical data center itself, the land itself, the security that actually relates to that data center. You actually need to ensure that you are taking care of all of that information, right? Very important. And when you move over to infrastructure, so the cloud providers, they provide you with infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. That is the only thing they provide you with. So you can see that you can never be responsible for the physical data center, the network of the data center, and the physical hosting of the data center. So those are the things that no matter what model that you use as a customer, you'll never find yourself being responsible of, right? Something that's very important to note. Now, if we go back to our question, which basically says, in the shared responsibility model, which responsibility will always remain with the cloud provider regardless of the type? A, the application security, you are responsible for that. Even at the very, I think with the platform as a service, you are responsible for that. Data classification, you are responsible for that. Physical security, I think someone did say C. Yes, regardless of the service that you choose, the cloud provider, in this case could be Microsoft, will always be responsible for the security of the data center, right? The last one is the identity and access. Well, honestly, with this one, you are responsible for it depending on the service type that you use. I think even with the platform as a service and all of that, and software as a service, you are responsible for all of that information. So if you did not read this diagram, you might have actually said, okay, cool, maybe they are, or you might have been misled. But just by understanding this, that the things that the provider will always be responsible for are these three. So whenever you see physical, and it's a cloud computing model, which is platform as a service and stuff like that, you need to actually know that it's actually the physical infrastructure. Okay, see, I thought there was a comment coming up. Right, cool. So does everyone understand why the correct answer in our case is actually C, physical security, because that's the thing that the cloud provider will always take care for you, right? Cool. I'm sure you guys can see now how easy, let's say, this section is actually. I think it's not really a difficult section. It's doable, honestly, compared to the other sections. Now, let's go to question number 3, right? Question number 3 now says, your company wants to minimize the upfront infrastructure cost and pay only for the computing resources used. Which pricing model is best describes this approach? Now, this is going to be an interesting one. I'm just going to give you guys a few minutes to see if there's any answer that's coming through. Do you guys think it's C? Is it B? Is it A? All right, so maybe while you guys are thinking of the answer, I'm just going to try to break down these different sort of answers here, right? So capital expenditure, well, with this one, what this normally speaks about is to say, if you want to, let's say you want to build a data center, right? You need to invest in infrastructure, you need to buy the land and stuff like that. So it's actually the capital you need to get started. So you cannot get started without actually incurring capital expenditure. It's the cost that you need to get started. And then consumption-based, which they call the operational expense, right? This is basically saying that you can get started, but at the end of the month, you're only billed based on what you actually used, right? Very important. So it's a consumption-based model to say you can use as much as to get started, it's fine. We'll give you access to everything that you need and all of that. But at the end of the month, you basically need to pay us. Fixed rate licensing, I feel like this one is basically saying that every month is a standard rate. I think if you think about, let's say, our fixed rental bills, right? The rent is going to be fixed unless there's a new contract saying that it is actually changing due to whatever circumstances. But that one speaks about a fixed rate that you have to pay, so that one will never change. The last one is reserve capacity pricing. I think this one is basically when you know how much you're going to spend, or you know the costing that you anticipate by the end of the month or whatever. I feel like that's when I would say this one is quite useful, right? So that's the only time I'd say this is useful. But if you look at our example over here, we want to minimize the upfront. That's the keyword here. So if you read this, the keyword basically is the upfront infrastructure cost. So we want to minimize the upfront infrastructure cost. So by this, we already know that we do not need capital expenditure, because capital expenditure will actually maximize the upfront cost, and you only want to pay for the computing resources that you used. This is basically describing B over here, right? Cool, and I see that a lot of people actually say B. I can see my screen is quite narrow. I'm not sure what could be causing it. I'm just going to see if I can maximize the screen. Let me see if I can maximize the screen. Okay, it seems like I'm not able to change, but hopefully it is clear for everyone to actually see, right? Cool. Now we are going to move on to the next question, and I think the solution should be here. So it's already here. Consumption-based model works better because it means you only pay for what you need, right? Cool. So now let's go to the next question, and I'll just give you guys some time to actually see if you can start working on it and see if you can actually answer it, right? So which benefit of cloud computing enables a system to automatically recover from failure and continue to function, right? So from this, we have to identify what exactly are the keywords from this. So which benefit of cloud computing enables a system to automatically recover? So this is our keyword over here, and failure and continue to function, right? Now let's think about the answers that are here, right? Let's think about this. So firstly, we've got scalability. What does scalability actually mean? So scalability basically means if the demand, okay, this is good because I'm seeing different answers. So scalability basically means if the demand, let's say I built an app and a lot of people access this app. my customer base is growing. Because my customer base is actually growing, what this means is that the demand for my website will actually increase. So that means if I do not scale up or increase the compute that I have, I might face issues because now there's a demand from the website that I basically have, right? So scalability really means that are you able to be able to adjust based on the demand, right? That's what that one is focusing on. Elasticity, so I think this one, I'm trying to see how I can be able to explain it. This one is definitely not it. It's not going to be the answer. Maybe let me explain high availability. So high availability, basically this one says, in the event that, let's say, people want to get access to your resources, right? Will they always get access to your resources whenever they need them, right? That's what the high availability one actually speaks into. I see someone already says D. I see someone says B. I think with the elasticity one, it's a tricky one. It's very close to the answer, right? I do get why someone might think that one is correct, right? Because elasticity would basically refer to automatically scaling up and down. So scalability speaks to the increasing the demand and decreasing to meet the demand, right, as I've explained. Then high availability ensures that the uptime, so the time that it actually takes for you to automatically recover from failures, that's important. Then you've got elasticity referring to automatically scaling up and scaling down based on the demand. It's very similar to scalability, right, but it talks about how maybe elastic you are able to scale up and scale down. Right. The reason why this one is correct is because fault tolerance is the ability of systems to continue to function in an event of a failure of some of its component and ensures that the system recovers automatically after downtime, right? Because the key one are automatically recover, failure, and continue functioning. So those would have been the key words, because if you look at elasticity, right, it refers to automatically scaling up or down, right? It's only scaling up and down. There's nothing about failure. So this could basically means how flexible are, let's say, the cloud services. When the demand goes up, right, are you scaling up? If the demand goes down, are you scaling down? What is the flexibility in you doing the scale up and scale down, right? Basically, I think that's the best way I can explain elasticity. It's a bit of a tricky one, but this one wouldn't cater for failure, but it refers to your system is fully functioning, but how do you scale up and scale down, right? That one specifically focuses on that, but it wouldn't cover you from a failure point of view, right? That's the one thing that I would say about that one. Cool. So hopefully everyone understands why the correct answer is D. Right, cool. But they're very close, but I think it was, one of those sort of trick questions, if I can say so, right? So now let's go to question 5, right? So now looking at question 5, this is another type of question that they would sort of normally ask you during the exam, right? So this one is a very unique type of question. So for each of the questions below, select the correct answer, yes, if it's true or false, whatever. So if you think the statement is true, you say yes. If you think the statement is false, you say no, right? So I think with this one, what I did add a couple of notes, right? Because this one specifically focuses on platform as a service, right? So I thought, let's understand what platform as a service is all about, right? So there's a couple of points here that are important to note. So platform as a service, right, is a cloud computing model that enables developers with a platform to build, deploy, and manage applications without worrying about the underlying infrastructure. So the nice thing about this, when you get in a very good platform where you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure, like do we have enough resources to whatever that I'm trying to run, for whatever that you're trying to build, you don't have to worry about that. So all of that is actually taken care of, right? And it includes everything needed for the application, right? Okay, my screen was moving again. the operating system, runtime, databases. So you don't have to worry about any of this, right? You just use this platform. It allows you to build and all of that. So that's one of the things that's really cool about using this type of model. Now, in terms of the different solutions or statements we've got here, and you guys can either say yes or no, right? So the first one says, a platform as a service solution is a solution that hosts web apps in the Azure and provides full control of the operating system that the host actually is using. Now, this I would immediately eliminate it because platform as a service includes application, operating system, so you don't have to worry about that. So basically, the first answer, I would go for this one. It's a no, because with platform as a service, you cannot control, what is this thing? You have no control on the operating system or anything like that, right? Very important to understand. You do not have control of the operating system. It's already there. Everything just comes installed and all of that. You just need to build from there. The second one then basically says a platform as a service solution is a solution that hosts web apps in the Azure, provides the ability to scale the platform automatically. I would say, think about it, right? This is a platform that allows you to build. If the demand goes up, you've got support. If the demand goes down, you still have support. So in essence, it allows you to scale the platform automatically. Right, because this is some of the benefits you don't have to worry about, because they say explicitly here, you don't have to worry about databases and all of this underlying infrastructure, because that is scaled for you without you worrying about it. So if you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure, it actually does make your life easy. So with this one, I would actually say yes, right? The correct answer is actually yes. And then if we move on to the other point that's also very important, a platform as a service, right? Is a solution that hosts web application, provides in Azure, provides professionals development services to continually add features. I think this one was already given. I think this one was already given in the points that I actually gave there, right? Because you don't have to worry about anything, right? You can literally continuously develop, and you've got the ability to add features for the custom applications that you're building, because you're literally getting this platform. So it's you basically, so you're getting this platform over here, right? So you've got your platform, and then you've got infrastructure sitting over here. Then you can build as many applications as you want, and you can add custom features to that application, because you don't have to worry about anything, because it gives you the flexibility to sort of customize and add more features to the different applications that you're actually building. So this is really great for developers, and for them, it actually does work really well. Cool. Hopefully that is easier to understand. Okay, cool. There we even have the solution over here. So you can see that the first one is no, the second one is yes, and the other one is a yes. Right, cool. If there's any questions, please just let me know. I can just answer the questions as we go. Cool. Okay, here's another tricky one. Yeah, one thing that I would say, you have to read the questions honestly, because if you skip reading the questions, you might actually find yourself at a sort of disadvantage, because it's really about identifying the keywords, right? That's one thing that I would say. The exam is very tricky in the sense that they would use certain words, and if you do not pay attention to you might think it's a very simple solution, but if you don't pay attention to the keywords, so if there's any advice that I would give to anyone who's going to write the exam, is that pay attention to the keywords. That's one thing that's really important, right? So now let's go to the next one. The next one says, to complete the sentence, select the appropriate option in the answer area, right, hotspot area, right? So that's what we need to do. So when you are implementing software as a service, you are responsible for what? So when we talk about software as a service, what exactly are you responsible for? So we already seen a diagram like this, right? I think I also did add a diagram, so I've got a couple of examples of here, right? So software as a service, Azure manages everything for you. infrastructure operating system. The user just uses the app, no installation or maintenance that is required, and access via the browser and whatever. So everything is literally managed for you if you're using the software as a service, right? So what would you be responsible for? So the first one, configuring high availability. I would definitely take this one out because you do not have control over high availability. It is going to automatically scale for you without you sort of worrying about it, right? The second one, defining scalability rules. I'm definitely taking this one out because you do not define scalability rules, right? Installing the software as a service. I don't think so. If you look at this point over here, it says no installation and maintenance required. So you don't have to worry about installation and maintenance, right? So this one is completely out. The last one says configuring the software as a service solution. I would agree with this one, right? Because if you think about it, okay, see someone says installing, right? This one, so I think something to be very clear about, right? I think this is also the one thing that I was also thinking about initially when I saw the question, right? The installation here does not necessarily speak to, let's say, you downloading the application from, let's say, whatever iStore, whatever, all these different application platforms, right? It's more about the maintenance and configuration side of things, right? It's more on the maintenance side of it because you are not responsible for that. But you can configure the solution itself because think about whatever application that you have. You can do settings on the preference of colors, you know, you can do settings on, like think about your Google Chrome, you can decide what colors you want to use, you can change the background, you can save a different home page and all of that. So you've got control in configuring the actual platform itself. So they give you the platform and you have to, they give you the application and you have to configure the application yourself, right? You can set it however you want to do it. So you've got the freedom to add whatever features, not to say building them, but you are able to customize it to your liking. So that's why I would say this one is correct. Installation is wrong because this one speaks to, I think, something more on the maintenance side of things. Right. Cool. So this one is one of the trick questions. So I see someone say installation. So this one might have taken you out of the game. That would have been a point lost, but you see, that's how they try to trick you, right? It's very important to just read them as much as you can. So the correct answer here, I would say, is basically this one, right? Okay, cool. And there we go. The answer is that one. Cool. So we have just finished the first part, right? Not to say entirely it is done, but I think those are the questions that I wanted us to sort of have a look at, just to get an understanding of what, because I feel like this section is really easy. I don't think it's difficult per se, right? Because the things that they will definitely be testing you on, as I indicated early when we started, is if you can define what is cloud computing, if you can understand the shared responsibility model, if you can tell the difference between a public cloud, a private cloud, and a hybrid cloud, those are the things that they actually need from you, right? Those are the things that are going to be sort of important for you to understand, right? That's one thing that I'd say about this one, not too hectic. Then understand the use cases, right? Where do we use certain, when is it better for you to use the hybrid? When is it better for you to use a certain one? And also understanding the different benefits of cloud computing, the high availability, scalability, reliability, predictability. So you can see that elasticity is not explicitly here. I think that one is a bit of a trick one, honestly. You've got security, governance, manageability. So it's really great it's easier to, I think there's a debate on this one. Some people say it's easier to secure your cloud environment, but I don't know, because a lot of companies are being hacked. But you know, there are certain levels of benefits in you actually using that, because you basically rely on Microsoft with all the amazing security tools that they have. But it's also debatable. And if you understand, those are the things that you need to know. If you can master those things, I think you should be fine when it comes to this first section. But are there any questions from anyone with regards to the first section? Okay, cool. I'll just wait for the question. I think there's obviously a delay between the live and yeah, I think YouTube lives are very tricky to do, honestly. Maybe just doing a Teams and recording might be better, honestly. But yeah. Okay, cool. So I think the next area that we're going to start looking at is the Azure infrastructure. Now, this is where a lot of the points are, and I would say this is also where a lot of people might actually find themselves losing points because it is quite a tricky section. So there's quite some tricky questions, right? So let's cover in terms of what you need to understand to pass this section, right? So with this one, firstly, understand the core architecture, right? When they say understand the core architecture, understand what is an Azure region, what is an availability zone, what are resources, what are subscriptions, what are management groups, and all of that, right? You know, these are some of the things that are going to be important for you to understand. And then the other part that they will test you on is the compute, right? Networking. I think networking is the one that takes a lot of people out. Unless you come from cybersecurity, honestly, I'd say it's really great when you come from cybersecurity. And storage services, things one is not really that difficult. You need to understand redundancy. This is about having copies of your storage and stuff like that. AZ copy. These are migration tools that actually help companies migrate into the cloud and all of that. Then the next one is going to be identity and security. Very important to understand intra ID, multi-factor authentication, role-based access controls, and all of that. I think this is where the cybersecurity guys honestly pick up the points quite a lot. So that's one thing that I would say. So what I thought I would do before we get into the content is maybe let's sort of dive into the content itself, right? So I have a couple of notes just to help you guys remember a few things over here. So firstly, I've got something called, in terms of, so this is how they split it, right? So the first component is the Azure core architecture, right? So you've got the physical infrastructure and you've got, let's say the inside infrastructure, right? So the first one speaks about the infrastructure. This is when you look at the data centers, right? The physical infrastructure that's required to make this thing actually work, right? So the infrastructure looks at the different regions, and I think that's something really important is that you've got something called regions. So if you see a term called a region, so regions are basically physical locations within one or more data centers, right? Very important. This is a physical location, so you might have different data centers, but they're physically separate, right? It's basically regions like South Africa North and South Africa West. So this is basically Cape Town and Johannesburg, per se. And then you've got region pairs. So region pairs, these are linked sort of like regions in the same geography for disaster recovery. So there's actually a visual that's going to explain this, right? And then you've got availability zones, you've got physical, so availability zones is another concept to really understand. Maybe let me just switch over to this, right? So I've got this over here and hopefully it's going to reinforce the understanding, right? So you've got, a region could be South Africa overall. So you've got South Africa overall here, and you've got the data center that is sitting in Cape Town, and you've got another data center that's sitting in Johannesburg, right? So those would be sort of like a region. So this would be the different regions that we actually have over here. An availability zone, it's basically the same location. So we could be in Cape Town, but these data centers are basically distant from each other. So an availability zone is basically a group of data centers within the same city. So I would say data centers within the same city, but they are separated by some sort of distance, right? That's the important thing. So it's not to say they're very far from each other. It can be, let's say, for example, in Johannesburg, we might have a data center in Midrand, data center in Sandton, and let's say a data center in Parktown, right? So those would be availability zones. So that means we've got three availability zones, so they're not too far away from each other. But that means if something happens to the data center in Sensen, we can recover from the data center that's sitting in Midrand. If something happens to the data center in Midrand and Sensen, we can recover from the data center that's actually sitting in Parktown, right? So that's what availability zones are really about, right? And then you've got something called region pairs. I think with region pairs, with this one, I would say maybe let's not use South Africa and South Africa overall, but let's say there's a data center, maybe let's say South Africa is paired with Brazil. Those could be region pairs. So this could be different regions that you use to actually pair your data. So basically saying that some of your data is stored in let's say South Africa, and then some of it is stored in Brazil. Because the distance is really massive, you have to call that some sort of region pair, right? I think a better way to explain this maybe might be drawing, honestly. I'm just going to do this quickly. I think some of these concepts are better drawn. The problem is that my drawing is also bad. Right, so maybe let me rather do this, right? So this is a region, right? And this region is South Africa, right? And let's say this is a data center, and this is a data center, right? So this entire country is basically called a region, right? I think this is the region basically. The reason why we can call this a region is because I'm just going to say, let me see, am I able to use a different color? Take this. Right. Data center over here, data center over here, right? Data center over here, data center over here. Okay, cool. So in Cape Town, we've got three, let's say, maybe let's call this an availability zone, right? This could be a one availability zone. Then you could have another availability zone because let's say in Cape Town, there's different places where you've got multiple data centers, and there's different data centers, we've got multiple availability zones. And this is another, let's say there's another data center over here, another data center over here. There is availability zone, another availability zone, right? Cool. So what this basically means is that, let's say I decide to say, okay, cool, I'm based in Johannesburg and I want to store my data in this data center. This is one data center, right? So in this data center, if something happens to this data center, I've actually copied my data to maybe Midrand, right? So Midrand, I know that I can still recover my information from Midrand. You know, that's another way of doing it, right? But what if the entire province is taken down? I can actually still recover my data in another region, right? In another sort of area. So you've got Cape Town over here. That's where I can also recover my data set. So within a region, you've got multiple availability zones that actually offer you the ability to recover your data. So very important. An availability zone would be within a region. So they'll call this an availability. All right, so this would be an availability zone. And within an availability zone, what covers an availability zone is basically called a region. Now, if you build another region, let's say this is Brazil. All right, this is Brazil. Then Brazil is the same setting, data centers, 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 and stuff like that, right? It's got another similar type of setup over here, right? So now, if you decide, so this could be called region pairs, right? Because so with region pairs, it means that you are able to store your data in this region, and you can also have a copy of this. So hypothetically, let's say it happens that the entire South Africa is actually, which is not likely to happen, honestly. I think such events are are really less likely to happen. That's one thing that I would say. It's not really possible for something like that to happen. But let's say in South Africa everything goes down. Let's say load shedding has been going on for days or even a year or something like that, right? Then you might use another region. So because these two regions are paired, they're now called region pairs, right? So that's basically the concept that they're trying to explain here. So a region could be one geographic piece of land that has got multiple availability zones. So it has multiple availability zones, right? And an availability zone basically has multiple data centers, right? So the first level would be what? An availability zones. So why is it not drawing? So an availability zone has got multiple DCs, right? Multiple data centers. And then a region has got multiple availability zones, right? That would be a region. A region pair is basically it's basically more than one region, right? That's basically what a region is. Basically two regions that could be paired with each other or something like that. So that's the concept that this is all about. So always understand that availability zone is multiple data centers. You group them, then you get an availability zone. Region is multiple availability zones. Region pair is basically two different regions being paired with each other. Hopefully that sort of makes sense. It's a very important concept to sort of understand if you're going to be writing the exam, right? Cool. Then there's something also really important. There's something called sovereign regions, right? So the best way to understand sovereign regions, this is basically special regions for government regulated use. Now, if you think about it, if you are China, China does not allow, let's say, for their data centers to be located anywhere. Honestly, that's one thing that I'd say. They wouldn't allow, let's say, their data centers to be located in a region that is for America. So it's basically dedicated regions for government because of how sensitive the data that the government actually carries or the government actually has. So that's one thing I'd say about that one. It's really about ensuring that the government data is protected. So normally they would have their own sort of dedicated infrastructure or sort of regions where you don't mix up China and America. That's really going to be a problem even from a compliance perspective, right? So that's one thing that I'd say. And then the other end of it, we've got something called Azure Resources. So I won't be able to see my chat. I think my other screen has disappeared again. So I won't be able to see messages for some time, but I'm just getting it ready. So the other part that's also important is the Azure region, the Azure Resources, right? So there's a couple of things that's important to understand from this one. So I think I tried but I don't think this is really going to work. I might need to do another drawing, right, just to explain this demonstration. Gonna see if I can create another slide, right? Okay, cool. So I'm just going to explain the architecture of the Microsoft environment, right? And hopefully this is going to help you guys understand this concept around regions and all of that. So firstly, when you create an account on Azure, you'll get something called a management group. Management group. Actually, let me see if there is a slide that actually speaks to that. I think I might have a slide that could actually be speaking to that. Okay, let me see if I can get this over here. Right, cool. Yeah, I think now I can see the screen. Right, cool. So what I'm going to show you here, you've got management groups, right? So management group is basically, if I can say, the highest level within your organization, right? You've got management groups, and then under management group, you've got a subscription. So I'm going to call this SB, another subscription. And within a subscription, you've got our resource group. I'm gonna call this RG. So then within a resource group, you've got resources, right? You've got resources. So this is what normally happens, right? So the hierarchy of, let's say, the Microsoft environment or the Microsoft infrastructure, basically, so you've got resources. So what are resources? Resources could be a database. Yes, the live will be saved. It will be saved. So don't worry about that one. I think tomorrow's one is going to be better than today. I guess I've got some lessons to learn, honestly. So the database, right? You could have, let's say, applications, right? And you could have virtual machines, right? These are the couple of different things that you could actually have, right? That's one thing that I'd say. These are a couple of different things that you could actually have as resources. So resources are the things that you create in your cloud environment and all of that. But these resources can be, so this RG also can have resources, right? Resources, but all of your different resources can be grouped into something called a resource group. So a resource group is basically a way for you to group similar resources, or maybe resources that are created. Let's say the IT team wants to have their own resources, the finance team wants to have their own resources, and they don't want to mix up those resources, type of thing, right? So that's what resource groups actually do. You can group, so you could have this is called resource group 1, this is resource group 2, right? And then at the top over here, you've got something called a subscription, right? So a subscription, basically all the cost that is actually incurred, because when you use all of your resources over here, you are being charged by Microsoft, right? So in essence, what this actually means is that for all the expenses that you incur and for all the expenses that would be created by resource group 1 and 2 would be linked to this. So if the expense, let's say this was 1 rand, this was 2 rand, this was 4, so this would be summed and then it goes to resource group 4. This would basically be, this is 6, right? This is 7. So this would be 7 rand. And let's say on this one, this is other resources, and you've got 1 and 1 and 1. So then you'll have 3 rands. So in total, you are getting charged 10 rand because these resource groups are actually contributing to the costing. So whoever is responsible for this subscription would be responsible for, let's say, paying that amount, right? Then you've got another subscription, right? And then it has its own resource groups, right? The same hierarchy, RG and whatever. And whatever expenses are incurred from here would also be charged individually for this. Now, you can really start to see that the importance about subscriptions is that they allow you to be able, let's say, to manage the costing or even allocate costing to certain departments. Because on management groups, you could have, let's say, different departments over here, different departments, and you could assign subscriptions to different departments. Maybe say this subscription is assigned to this one, and this is assigned to this one. So if you think about big organizations that have got multiple entities and multiple departments and all of that, this is a really good structure that really helps them to manage their environment, and I think it's really good for them to better manage their cloud environment or their cloud infrastructure. And all of that. So when you hear things like your management group is at the top, right? Management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, and then you've got your resources at the bottom, right? So if we go back to this thing over here, so it says a resource group is a single item, right? A resource is a single item. Virtual machine, database, or storage, right? As I've indicated, it's actually a single item. That's what it really is. Then you've got resource. So you've got a resource group. A resource group is basically a container to organize related resources. So now you're organizing that information that's actually related to each other. And then you've got a subscription, which is the billing and access boundary. So anything to do with costing, you basically would group it in, let's say, that particular subscription. You can have as many subscriptions as you have, right? And then management groups are basically a way for you to organize multiple subscriptions and all of that. So that's one thing that I'll say about this one. So I think I wanted us to sort of like get into the concepts and all of it. Hopefully that would actually give everyone a bit more understanding. I'm just quickly checking the time because our live is probably going to end at around 8. So maybe we can take, let's say, a 10-minute break, and then we can come back and continue with content. I think we are back now. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Okay. I think we are back now. Okay, great. So I think we're just going to continue off of, I think we were just covering the different, with my drawing over there. We're covering what are management groups, what are resource groups, so just to get an understanding of what those things are. Because as we start to go through the questions, you'll start to see this quite often. So just understanding that is also something that's very important. There's also a couple of key concepts for you to understand, especially on the compute side of things. So like Azure Compute, this is basically, I would say the Azure Compute is the resources. If you remember back there, we did the diagram and we were speaking about the different resources. I would say this is really the resources that you'll be building, so virtual machines, containers, and all of that, right? So there's a couple of definitions that I want us to basically look at, but just reading high level, right? A virtual machine is basically virtualization of the hardware, right? You've got complete control of the infrastructure. So I think that's one of the best ways that I understand virtual machines. Then another term to understand is something called the VM scale set. So auto scaling multiple virtual machines. But maybe before we look at the definitions, I think it would be great for us to maybe look at virtual machines in line with containers, right? So I think this is what I use to normally help me with my understanding, right? So basically, if you look at these two diagrams over here, right? So containers and virtual machines are really about this idea of virtualizing compute or operating system, right? So I'll start with the virtual machine. So at the bottom, you've got hardware. So assume that this is a computer, right? And this computer's got hard drive, a CPU, a RAM, and all of that. So this is basically the hardware components of this computer. And then what you get something called a hypervisor. So a hypervisor is basically a way for you to split the resources for, it's basically the mechanism required for you to be able to split this. If you've got 10 gig of RAM and you want to split it between two computers, then you're going to have 5 and you're going to have 5, but it's still 10. So it doesn't, let's say, take away the compute that you basically have, but it's more about sharing the compute between different, let's say, virtualized environments, right? So firstly, you've got virtual machine number 1, then you've got a virtual machine number 2. So the hypervisor allows you to have multiple virtual machines, and these virtual machines actually can have the different operating systems that they want, right? Hopefully everyone can hear me, right? So one thing that's important to note is that here you can have a Linux operating system, here you can have a Mac, I think it's called iOS operating system, right? Because if you think about it, what are you virtualizing or what are you sharing, right? So virtualization basically means maybe let's say sharing the compute between different computers and stuff like that. I think that's the more simplistic definition without getting into the technical terms, right? Because you are virtualizing the hardware, you are splitting the hardware, and you've got control over what operating system you can install, right? Because the only thing that you're splitting is the hardware. Very important. But if we go to the next one, hopefully I'm still visible, right? If we go to the next one, which is the container. Now the container is slightly different, right? You install your hardware over here. Let me maybe use the laser. Hopefully that should make things better. Let me use the laser over here. All right. So now when it comes to the container, so with the container, you've got your hardware over here, and then you've got your operating system over here, and then you've got a container engine that basically allows you to have container number 1, and container number 2, right? It's really about virtualization, but the difference here is that containers virtualize the operating system. You're not virtualizing the hardware because you've already installed the operating system, but you're now virtualizing the operating system over here. Because this is a Windows operating system, right? Let's say virtualization basically means, let's say, splitting, being able to split this different operating systems, right? So you've got a Windows operating system. Because you are virtualizing this, or you are splitting this, you're going to have Windows OS and another Windows OS. But here you can see that there's a slight difference, because I'm virtualizing the hardware, and then I've got the virtual machine, then I can install whatever operating system that I want to install. So the key difference to note here is that virtual machines allow you to have more control on what operating system you want to install, right? But you're virtualizing the hardware. The container, on the other hand, is basically you virtualizing the operating system, because you've got the hardware, then you install the operating system. Because you are virtualizing at an operating system level, you do not have the privilege of having different operating systems, because that's what you're virtualizing, that's what you are sort of splitting per se, right? Hopefully this sort of helps you understand the terms of operating system of the container and the virtual machine. It's a very simplistic way of understanding it. I think it does really make it easy for you to understand, because I think there's so many definitions out there, and I think they can be quite complicated, if I can put it that way. Okay, I'm checking the chat quickly. So I see there's a question. So you can't have different operating systems with the container. So yes, because you are virtualizing the operating system, then you wouldn't be able to have multiple operating system, right? Because what you are splitting this, and because the virtualization happens at this level where you've already installed this. Now you can have OS here and another OS over here. And then with the virtual machine, because you are starting with the hardware, you are virtualizing the hardware. That's what you're virtualizing, right? The hardware itself. Then once you split your hardware, you can still install whatever operating system that you want, because that was not what you were virtualizing, right? So with container, with that particular container instance that you virtualize, you can only do it for one operating system, right? Hopefully that answers your question. Right, cool. So I think that's the one way I would say it's the best for you to actually understand containers and stuff like that, right? Then you've got something called a virtual desktop. I think this one is very easier to understand. It's basically, but I'll just do a diagram to actually try to illustrate this. And the other one that I think is important to understand is Kubernetes, right? So Kubernetes is basically an open source platform that helps you automate the deployment and scaling and management of containerized application. So it's really a way for you to be able to manage containers, right? It really makes it easy. You know, the more containers you have, the more difficult they are to deploy, manage, and scale. But what Kubernetes actually does, it allows you to be able to scale and manage your containers much more easy. I think that's one thing that I would say is really cool about Kubernetes. And then lastly, you've got something called serverless compute, right? So serverless compute basically means you basically run whatever specific that you need. But I think the best way for me to explain this is through one of my diagrams. Let me see if I can. Hopefully you are answered on the question that you asked. Let me see if I can do some sort of illustration. I am keeping an eye on the comments, right? So I'm gonna bring back let me see if I can present back, and I should be back. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to use the drawing. Right, cool. So now let's think about this, right? So the hardware is sort of like the starting point, right? So let's say I've got hardware over here, right? I'm going to call this HD, right? Let's say this is hardware, right? So containers, maybe let's say VMs or virtual machines would basically virtualize the hardware. So they would split the hardware, basically sharing it amongst the whatever different. So VMs, they virtualize the hardware. So VMs allow you to go at a hardware level. Okay, let me see. Thank you. It took me so long to understand. Okay, cool. That's good to hear. So virtual machines, they would start from here, right? And then you've got, let's say, no, rather, let me just see if I can get an eraser. Okay, now I cannot see my eraser now. It's done. So virtual machines would basically virtualize the hardware, right? Once you virtualize the hardware, then you've got this virtual machines, right? Let's say this is VM1, and then this is VM2, right? And then at the top, you can now have your operating system for this one, then operating system. Then at the top, you've got an application, right? Application. You've got an application, right? And I think that should be it. So this is how virtual machines would work. And then when it comes to containers, I think you've already seen, right? We've got HD hardware, then we've got the operating system, right? OS. Then the containers only would virtualize this, and then you've got you splitting it here, and you splitting it here. You've got the containers. This is one container, and then this would be the what is this thing? The application. The application. Now, this is what I want to say. Virtual machines are expensive. The reason why virtual machines are expensive is because you are going all the way. So virtual machines actually give you control over infrastructure. So if you want to have control over the infrastructure, you want to go for virtual machines, right? Because they go all the way to the infrastructure, so you get more control, right? But if you don't want to go all the way to infrastructure, you can take a container. They would be much more cheaper, right? There's another option that you've got. The other option is a desktop, right? So desktop, think of them as a virtual computer, right? The best way that I can actually explain virtual desktop is to say, let's say you've got your own laptop, right? This is your own laptop. Okay, hopefully I can do a proper laptop over here. Let's say these are the keyboards, right? These are the keys. All right. So you've already bought a laptop for yourself. You've got a laptop, but let's say you wanted to access another sort of virtual laptop, right? So within a laptop, you can actually access, let's say, I'm trying to see what example. Okay, let's say you are actually running, this is a MacBook, right? You're running a MacBook, but you want to access a virtual desktop platform, right? So there could be a website. This website allows you to be able to rent out. It's a virtual laptop, right? It's a sort of like it's not a physical laptop, but it's a virtual laptop. So you could actually connect your laptop to this virtual Windows. I don't know why I say that, Windows laptop, right? So this is basically an online laptop that you can access. It is the same thing that you actually have. You have to log into the laptop. I'm not sure if you guys have seen like lab environments. If you've done any of the Microsoft certifications, you basically get a virtual environment where you can access. It's like it's you remotely accessing another laptop, and it helps you to sort of do whatever activities that you might want to be able to do, right? So with a virtual laptop, you might be accessing a particular application through this virtual laptop, right? And the nice thing about this is basically that it's much more cheaper because you're not owning the infrastructure or operating system. You're not splitting the operating system or anything like that. You're just accessing this virtual desktop right, through whatever, and you just want to access whatever particular application or a sandbox environment. I feel like that's maybe the best way I can explain a virtual desktop, right? Maybe that's the best way to actually explain it. Then there's something called serverless compute, right? If you go back over here, there's something called serverless compute. So the best way I can explain serverless compute is basically to say, what if you do not want to own the hardware? What if you do not want to own the operating system? What if you do not, let's say, want to own the application? You just want to run a particular task, and once that particular task is ran, you are happy with it, right? You don't want to have any additional, you don't want to incur any additional reasons, because maybe let me say the chain here is HD, right? Let me just redraw this. HD OS, right? Application, right? I'm going to say application. This is going to be virtual desktop, right? Virtual desktop. And then at the end here, I'm going to have functions. Functions, or maybe let's call them a task, right? If you get a virtual machine, you are getting control all the way to the hardware, right? If you get a container, you're getting control up all the way to operating system, but not the hardware, right? If you get a virtual desktop, you're basically accessing applications, right? You through another virtualized sort of computer, you're accessing applications. That's what it would actually give you. But if, let's say, you don't want to own all of this infrastructure, you only want to use a particular service you want to run a particular task for, let's say, for like an hour, you just want to run that particular task, and once the task is done, you don't want to own anything, you want to minimize the expenses that you might actually incur. And that's when serverless compute actually comes into play. So it's you would only say, I want to, let's say, run a script, right? Because you just want to run a script, you're only going to use a function and it's going to run the script, and then that's it. You're not going all the way here, because the higher you go, the more expenses that you start to incur. That's something that's really important. The higher you go here, the more that you actually have to pay. So virtual machines are more expensive than containers, and then virtual desktop are much more cheaper than containers, and then functions are the cheapest model that you can get, because you're only running whatever that you need, and then that's it. It's based on a task. You don't have to own anything. You don't have to own a virtual desktop or anything like that. You just want to run a task, and then that's it, right? Hopefully that explains the whole concept of virtual machines and serverless compute, Kubernetes, and all of that. And as I've said, what Kubernetes actually does, it's a way, because now imagine this, right? I think if you look at this, you could have multiple containers. I'm just messing up my slides, honestly. You've got multiple containers. So how do you scale them? How do you scale them up, and how do you scale them down? And how do you ensure that everything is working, right? This is where you want to bring Kubernetes. So Kubernetes basically is a service that allows you to be able to manage all of these containers, because the more containers you get, the more messy it actually becomes. They are cheaper, but they can actually get messy because now you've got more containers. How do you manage the scaling and scaling down? And that's where Kubernetes actually comes. They normally say, if you think of or maybe a choir per se, right? Or let's say there's a conductor who normally conducts how the sound, the pitch of the tone and whatever. They normally reference the Kubernetes, something like that. So that would be a conductor that makes sure that everyone is singing at the right levels, and they're not going beyond anything, and they're not messing up the overall team's coordination. So that's one thing I would say is the best way to understand Kubernetes, right? I think some of these terms, when you read them through the Microsoft certification, it's really hard for you to understand them or even know what they really are talking about. So I would really say this, for me, is the simplest definition. and it's really going to reinforce that understanding. So if you understand this, it makes it easier for you to know, okay, cool, virtual machines are more expensive, but virtual machines give you more control over infrastructure. So virtual machines are basically infrastructure as a service, if you think about it, right? So this goes back to what we're talking about. This is BI, infrastructure as a service, because you're getting control over infrastructure. And then maybe your Kubernetes, your containers could be platform as a service, because it gives you more. Let me see, someone is saying diagrams really help. Yeah, thank you for that. So platform as a service, now this is more like the container level, and then you've got application. Now this is what? Software as a service. So you see the levels that we're even speaking about actually do appear here. So virtual, if there is also questions that might try to trick you, where they say, are containers infrastructure as a service or software as a service? You should know that I mean virtual machines are actually infrastructure as a service, right? That's one thing that I would say. This should make it easy for you to, let's say, go through the content, and I think moving forward, it should sort of become easy, right? Cool. So with that understanding, right, we still have day 2, so we still have more sessions where we're going to be going through the various questions. So you will be tested on some of the things, but hopefully that helps you. Hopefully moving forward today, you've got a better understanding of what containers are all about, and what virtual machines are all about, and what serverless compute is all about, and what functions are all about, and also the benefit, right? Because in the exam, I would say that's one thing they want to pick out from you. Like, are you able to see the use case? Based on this, if a company says they want to minimize expenses, right? They want to minimize expenses as much as they can. You already know that they're probably thinking about functions, or maybe if they want to have control over the hardware or whatever, you know that they actually think about virtual machines and stuff like that, because that's when that gives you more control over your infrastructure, right? Cool. So now, it's been great explaining all of those, but now let's get back to the questions, right? So I think this one is a bit of a tricky question, but they ask you about the Microsoft licensing, but there's something that I've got here just to explain this one, right? So let's go through the first question, right? So the first question says, your company intends to subscribe to Azure support plan. So this is the keyword. Your company wants to get this. They want to get access to the support plan. The support plan must allow for a new support request to be sort of like opened, right? Which of the following are support plans that will allow you to actually do this? So now, these are the different plans that they've actually given you, and you're supposed to select which of the plans are actually correct. So over here, you're supposed to select those plans, right? So in terms of the plans that Microsoft actually has, I've put them all here. So just in case you come across this question, it's really going to be important to understand the different ones. So you've got the basic sort of plan that you can get from Microsoft, right? I'm also using the basic plan for my business because I do not need IT support for now. I just try to do everything because I have an understanding of cloud computing to some extent, but I wouldn't advise, especially if your organization is really big. But the basic plan works for me because, I don't want to pay a lot of money for these things, and I'm just trying to figure out things at the moment, right? So the basic plan is free for all users. You don't have to pay anything. It includes a self-help resources. So whenever you want to configure something, want to build something in the Microsoft platform, you basically can go through the documentation. You get access to those resources that helps you understand how to sort of like navigate the whole thing, right? So you also get service health. So you also still get service health status. So what this is, actually, you can see the status of your resources. Are they healthy? Are they not healthy? So you still get all of that, right? So documentation, everything's available, but here's the keyword: no technical support. So if I needed technical support, I wouldn't be able to get it through the this plan because it actually doesn't offer you that option, right? That's something that's very important, right? What else is it? Then the next plan is the developer. This one is slightly expensive, right? So, but the nice thing about this one is that you do get access to technical support via only during business hours, right? That's the catch with this one. You get IT technical support, but only during business hours. The next one is the standard, much more expensive, right? This one you get access to 24 hours of technical support by the phone, email, whatever. So it's a really great service, right? Then the professional one, this one this is very expensive. Yeah, this one I feel like it's for very massive companies. You don't want to be finding yourself paying this amount of money. It really is a lot for a startup. This one includes 24-hour support with faster, so they actually prioritize you, right? Because this one you get 1 hour support, but this one you get within 15 minutes. You actually do get support. And the last one is Unified Enterprise. This one is much more advanced, comprises of 24 hours support, MS 365, Dynamics 365, with the fastest response. So they prioritize this one the most. Now, something I want you guys to pay attention to here, right? Because maybe this is not covered by the question that I'm asking. In the exam, they might try to see your understanding of the different licensing that Microsoft actually offers, right? So what they will do, or what they might do in the exam, they might actually say, from this list of subscriptions, which ones do you think is going to give you the most support that you need? Let's say they give you a scenario and the company is a bank. If you think about a bank, it's very critical for you to be able to get support, especially if something, let's say, happens, right? So for banks, they have to choose, let's say, the most expensive one because they want to be prioritized as much as possible, right? So that's the one thing that I want you guys to understand. So in the exam, they might actually try to ask you more questions based on this. They might say, in the case they're giving you a very critical company and you have to choose which subscription is the best, think about which one provides the most support, which one is the most cost effective. If a company is concerned about costing, maybe they might go for the basic ones. If they don't care about, let's say, you're concerned, like for me, I'm more concerned about the costing because I'm still a small startup, right? I don't want to incur a lot of expenses. And because of that, I'm okay with not getting technical support, right? So I don't have any issues if I don't get technical. I try to figure out things on my own. So I'm okay with a basic feature. But if you meet a company that, let's say, expenses are very important to them, but at the same time, they do want to get technical support. The cheapest model that they've got is probably the developer, right? So in the exam, just pay attention to those kind of questions because they might test you on different things. So in this question that we have, we are basically being tested by this company wants to get customer technical support. There is nothing about costing. If they did say they care about costing, we might have chosen the developer one, but there's nothing said about costing. So in this case, so another very important thing to say, answer by dragging in the correct option from the list, right? So from what I'm seeing here, developer is correct, standard is correct, professional direct is correct, premier, maybe this could be an old one, but we do not have Premier in the current Microsoft licensing models, so I don't think you'd want to choose this one. So I think that's one thing that I would say is you need to understand these different types because the questions will ask you more and they will try to trick you. So if I say I'm more concerned about the price, I don't care about support, basic. I'm concerned about the price, but I do want to get technical support, developer. We're a very critical company. Maybe we're in the hospital, we are a medical company. For us, what's important is getting support immediately. In that case, we have to go for the unified enterprise, right? If costing is not an issue for us, we have to go for the one that prioritizes us because we want to be able to recover as soon as possible. So that's how they try to trick you in these exams. So you just need to understand the licensing, and certain questions might come out differently. But honestly, for me, those would be the sort of like correct answers, right? Cool. Hopefully everyone understands the different licensing that's actually available for them. So now the other question that I want us to look at, this is question number 2. Hopefully everyone is still with me. Hopefully everyone is still with me, honestly. Cool. So the other question that I want us to speak about is question number 2. All right. So I think I do have a bit of, okay, cool. So this one, I think it's if you don't understand what is Azure Site Recovery, you might get this one wrong. But I feel like the key word here is site recovery. So even if you didn't know about this, you might be able to guess the question, right? I feel like you might be able to guess the question to some extent. So you need to complete the sentence by selecting the appropriate answer in the area, right? So you've got false. So it says Azure Site Recovery provides whatever for virtual machines, right? So you guys can already start giving me your answer if you are sure what the answer is, right? The first one, maybe before we do this, let me take you guys through the explanation, right? So what exactly is Azure Site Recovery? So Azure Site Recovery is a cloud-native disaster recovery as a service. It's a disaster recovery as a service solution that basically ensures business continuity by orchestrating the replication, failover, and recovery, right? So it's a disaster recovery service that basically ensures that business continues operating by orchestrating replication. So this is basically creating a copy of your data elsewhere, right? Failover, so are basically saying that, if something actually happens, you've got a place where you can actually recover your data, and once the other system is back, you can bring back that information because it's recovered. Recovery of the physical and virtual machine. So that's really the whole service around this one. And if we go to our options here, there's fault tolerance. To some extent, it's very close. Disaster recovery, very important word, right? So I feel like these two would have been very tricky to decide between, but elasticity, remember, elasticity speaks about your rate of scaling up and down, right? That's what elasticity basically speaks about, your rate of scaling up and down. So this one, definitely out. High availability, out, because we're talking about a service for the virtual machines. These two would be very close, but disaster recovery would be a key word because this is designed for disaster recovery specifically, right? So that's one thing that's important to actually make note of. So the correct answer in our instance would be disaster recovery, right? I see someone already say disaster recovery, and hopefully everyone is engaging. I know there's a few people actually watching the live. Hopefully it does make sense for everyone, but the correct answer actually is disaster recovery, right? So if it's your first time seeing something called Azure Site Recovery, please just understand what it's all about, because in the exam, they might ask you more. Maybe they might not just ask you about disaster recovery or something like that. They might ask you about what does it offer? Does it offer business continuity? It offers replication, failover, recovery, and stuff like that. It offers so many things, right? But what summarizes all of this information is disaster recovery, because disaster recovery is a broader term that summarizes failing over replication and recovery overall. So which is why disaster recovery is the correct word. It's the most correct answer in our case. Some of them are correct, but this is the most correct answer. Okay, cool. So we still have a couple of questions coming up, and I think this one is going to ask us about the Azure resource groups and all of that. And I think I already did explain this at the beginning, and hopefully it sort of gave away the answer for everyone with this question. So you guys can actually already post the solution if you think you know what the answer is on here, right? So I did get a diagram that actually does this better. I think my drawing can be quite tricky to understand, right? So at the top, you've got something called management groups, right? So at the very top, this would be a management group. So it's basically how you manage your entire ecosystem and your entire environment. So that's where your management groups actually come into play. Then at the bottom, you've got subscriptions. So subscriptions allow you to manage your billing, right? Very important. The key word about subscriptions, they allow you to manage the billing, because whatever expenses that would have been incurred by these two resource groups is taken to this one, and whatever expenses over here is actually taken to this one. And you can see that within a subscription, you can have as many, let's say, resource groups as you basically want, right? So this is a resource group. So RG, This is RG, and then this is a resources now. See, this could be a virtual machine, this could be a function, this could be a database and stuff like that. So you've got resources. So that's really the hierarchy or structure that Microsoft actually does use for their entire environment. So it's something that's really, really important to make note of or sort of understand, right? So with that understanding, if we go back over here, we are being asked, which resource does Azure? I think this is a very tricky question, right? Because they say resource, someone might think they talk about resource group and you might go for resource group, but it's a very tricky question. Which resource does Azure generate separate billing reports for invoicing by default? You see, the key word honestly is billing. Anything that has got to do with billing, it's definitely subscriptions. This would be the correct answer because anything that deals with billing is definitely on the subscription side, right? Hopefully this helps everyone. But this is very important because in the exam, they might ask it different. In the exam, they might change it up and say, what is used to, if you have a couple of resources, how do you organize, or what is the best way for you to organize or manage your resources? Resource group, right? Then you know that they're actually talking about resource group. If they ask you what is the highest level in an Azure environment, it's the management groups, right? What is the lowest level? It's your resource, right? So it's very important for you to be able to understand all of this. And they might even ask you, what is the benefit of having different subscriptions? The benefit of you having multiple subscriptions, it's, for example, if you think about a department, let's say if you think of an organization that is big and they've got multiple different groups or multiple entities, and the executives of that of those multiple groups need to report on certain activities, or why are we incurring so many expenses, or why is finance incurring. Subscriptions allow you to be able to hold certain groups or people accountable. If we want to know who's causing us a lot of expenses, it's easy to see that it's finance, because apparently finance, their subscription actually has a lot of costing assigned to it, and maybe IT is not even costing us quite a lot. So it's a really good way for you to sort of be able to manage your costing and to even hold people accountable, right? So some of the benefits of you actually using subscriptions and all of that. So in the exam, they do test you according to the different levels. It might not be just testing you on the subscription, but they might test you on different other things, basically, right? Cool. So we got that. So there is an answer. So Azure generates separate billing reports and invoices for each subscription so that you can organize, right? Then resource groups, so keyword, resource groups can be used to group costing, but will not receive an invoice, right? So that's a very important word. So the invoicing, it's the subscription, right? Because if you guys remember initially when I did the diagram, right, you could have 10 Rand attached to this and 50 attached to this, right? You can see the costing, but the invoice itself would be seen at this level. So the keyword was billing an invoice, because the invoicing would only be found at that point. All right, cool. Now, I think we are almost at the end. I think my laptop is also dying. Let me quickly plug my laptop. Okay, we are plugged. Okay, cool. Okay, so now we are now on question 4, and I think this is probably the last question for today. I think this is the last question for today. And please, guys, if you have any sort of questions, I think this is probably the best time to ask about them, because I think tomorrow we're probably going to go into more of the cybersecurity side of things and cover more of the cybersecurity, which I genuinely do not like, but we have to cover it anyway, right? Cool. So the last question basically says, which resource can you use to manage access, policies, and compliance across multiple subscriptions? Which one do you guys think? Now, This is something that manages a subscription. What could potentially manage a subscription? What is higher than, because if you're saying that you're going to manage a subscription, you probably have to be higher than a subscription. What is above a subscription? I'm just waiting for the answer. Hopefully more people can participate on this one. Okay, C. Which resource can be used to manage access, policies, and compliance across multiple subscriptions? Wow, this is, if we go back over here, right? What is higher than a subscription? Okay, see someone says B. So from the diagram, we can see that we've got management groups being at the very top. So management groups will allow you to manage the different subscriptions, and also it allows you to manage the overall compliance for your organization at the very top. And whatever access policies are designed at the top here, they're sort of applied as you trickle down, right? That's one thing that's really going to be important, right? So if we go back here, the correct answer is B, right? It is management groups. Administrative units, this is something else, right? So I've got the solution over here. So the correct answer here is management groups, but because management groups can be used in environments that have multiple subscriptions to streamline. The reason why this works is because they are already at the very top, right? The highest level. The only thing that can manage a subscription is something that is at the top of the subscriptions, because subscriptions manage resource groups. They manage the billing of the resource groups, and resource groups would manage the resources, right? Because of how the hierarchy is actually sorted. But management groups are at the highest, and they allow you to manage all of that information. Resource groups can be used to organize Azure resources, right? As I was saying, administrative units are used to delegate the administration of Microsoft Azure resources, such as user groups and whatever accounts, and they're used to provide access to resources, right? So this is more on the administrative access granting and all of that, but they wouldn't manage subscriptions. So that's something that's really important to actually note. So I'm not going to go to this one. I think we're going to stop here, and I think tomorrow we are basically going to start by understanding the cybersecurity side of things. I must apologize because we did start very late, and I think that sort of affected my presentation flow. Maybe this might have not been one of my best presentations, honestly, but hopefully tomorrow is going to be better. I will make sure that I plan ahead much more better. But I think that's it for today, unless you guys have any sort of questions in relation to what we covered so far. Any questions at all? So I think tomorrow we're going to start at 5. Yeah, we are going to start at 5. I will definitely make sure that by 4 I'm sorted up, because I just had issues today, but hopefully I won't have issues tomorrow. Yeah, I'm just still getting familiar with using Microsoft Live sessions. So, no, sorry, the Google Live sessions, they're a bit tricky to set up. I think that's the challenge with them. But I think tomorrow, definitely everything should start by 5, yes. And also, please come with questions. I think questions are welcome. You can just use the chat. You can ask me whatever questions, because at the end of the day, it's really for you guys to think about certain things and get things sorted. As you've seen here, that, you know, some of the things really need you to have a deeper understanding of it. And the more you understand these things, the more it's easy for you to answer any question at all. It's really about basically understanding it at a fundamental level. But yeah, tomorrow, definitely, I think tomorrow's live should be much more better than the one that we had today. If you guys don't have any questions, thank you so much, guys. I will see you tomorrow, same time, same place. think I might be muted. Okay, I think I'm back. So the DP900 basically focuses on the data fundamentals, right? That's what the DP900 is all about. It's more on the data side. The AZ fundamentals and the AZ-900 focuses on cloud computing overall. So you'll see that here we're looking at cloud computing overall. We look at the management of cloud, what is cloud computing, databases, we look at security, we look at data centers overall. But when it comes to the, what is this thing? When it comes to, I think someone's saying I'm mute. Yes, I was mute. But when it comes to, what is this thing, to the DP900, we learn about what is data, data fundamentals, types of data. You know, those are the different types of things that you actually learn about when it comes to the DP900, right? So I'd say that's the fundamental difference, right? So I think there is a lag between I think there's like a minute lag between YouTube and me speaking. So sometimes I might answer the questions slightly later. But I think that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for the questions. Please bring more questions tomorrow, and hopefully more people actually do attend. And as I've said, I do apologize for the inconvenience. Yeah, I'm still getting used to this Google platform, but yeah. Yeah, definitely it's not different from the other cloud fundamentals that you've had. It's literally pretty much the same thing. Okay, so I am going to end the live, but I will be seeing you guys tomorrow. Stop sharing.